Back at the Okta Gov Identity Summit presented by CyberScoop, I'm with James Yeager, Vice President for Public Sector and Healthcare for CrowdStrike. James, welcome. What are the biggest challenges that you're seeing agencies undertaking as they're trying to modernize, centralize their identity management solutions?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. Thrilled to kind of be back in person and see all these wonderful people around. Let's start with supply chain. Right, I think we've got supply chain in many ways, not exclusively, but to thank for this kind of awareness and this exposure that was maybe not wanted but necessary. Look, supply chain is not new, we know that, but I think the kind of pervasive nature and the prevalence of supply chain has kind of had that proverbial wake-up call effect that we all needed again. And at the core of supply chain, we know, is identity and identity-based protection and identity-based compromises. So, at CrowdStrike, we put a massive premium on understanding the adversary community, their behavior, and really dissecting the anatomy of the attack. And that means not just what happened, but why it happened, who was on the other side of the attack. And it's our assertion that 80% of today's attacks involve the use or misuse of credentials in and around the network. And so, look, this problem is real, and we've got to confront it head on.
What have you seen government do to make gains in identity management last couple of years, especially since the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that the government should be credited with. I mean, let's start with kind of the policy and legislation side, right? Look at the executive order on cyber, look at the memos and the binding operational directives that have come as a result of that. Look at events like this and look at the speakers and how frequently everyone's talking about identity and zero trust. And it's not just lip service. This is genuine, very authentic, hey, we need to be a part of solving for this. And when you talk about problem solving, the very first thing you have to do is acknowledge and identify that a problem exists in the first place. And so the government has done that. And there's more work to be done. But this is no longer one of those, hey, trust but verify. This is, never can you trust, always verify, always do it on a continuous basis in real time. And so it's not an easy solve for the government, but I think they've made great progress. And now you've got DoD, OCIO, and NIST and other bodies putting a finer point with a 2.0 definition of zero trust, with identity being central again, as it should be. And the government should be credited for not operating in a vacuum and not operating under this assumption that they've got all the answers, they've got it all figured out. So they're relying on industry because we play a contributing role there.
Mm-hmm. What have you seen, the kind of impact have you seen as a result of these tools now that are available in the cloud? You mentioned zero trust and identity's key role in that.
Right.
What's that look like to you now?
Well, I think the good news is technology has arrived, right? Technology is not the barrier and impediment that it once was. 10 years ago, zero trust is not a new concept. It's been around for a decade plus, and it is evolving and adapting, as we already discussed. But 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, technology was in many ways, in the government's mind, a legitimate excuse for why they couldn't kind of get out of this state of inertia, right? This legacy and antiquity that was propping many of the government agencies up was a contributor to the problem. And so now what the government has recognized is, hey, look, we've got to graduate. We have to evolve. We can't use that as an excuse anymore. And we're seeing a lot of teeth and a lot of action. I think the government could be a little bit more decisive if we're just being candid. By the way, decisive doesn't mean being reckless. It doesn't mean being impulsive and impatient. It just means operating with more conviction and more confidence. And with technology at kind of the central core of all of this, I think we're all in a much better position to solve for this.
James Yeager of CrowdStrike, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.